All right. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Serious Angler podcast, and welcome back to another edition of the Real Biology. Joined here with Mr. Stephen Bardin, as always. Steve, what's going on, brother?
Bailey, just hard at work. How about yourself? You traveling?
Was doing a lot of traveling, but
Yeah.
we are back home now, trying to get our life back together. It's always like I had conversations with a few other content creator folks on our trip last week. It was a really cool time in Minnesota with Humminbird Minn Kota. So shout out to them for the invite. But
Heck
I
yeah.
was talking with a few creators of like, because obviously this is my first year full time, and I was like, man, I've been struggling because they've asked me how you liking it, are you running any roadblocks? And it's like, man, I've always been a routine person, and I'm realizing
Mm.
now. I think while I'm trying to make a routine, I think a routine is impossible, especially when you plan on having trips and travel. And they're like, yeah,
Right.
you're never gonna have a routine. It's more like set hours and things you need to get done each week, and try to make a daily routine that's different from every day, which is fun, but sometimes could be crazy. But the travel's fun. I love the travel.
Yeah, for now, you'll love the travel. And then eventually the travel becomes a job. And you're like, I just want to be home. I want to actually see my home.
Yeah, I want to see my house. Yeah, I hear
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
you
Well, that's
traveled,
cool.
man, to Kentucky Lake. How was that?
Yeah. I was able to go to Kentucky Lake and back within 24 hours, plus do
That's
a huge
impressive.
habitat project. Yeah, I'm telling you, you get old and you realize the travel, it's cool. But no, the Kentucky Lake project. So of course I went to the MLF event, the Bass Pro Tour event, and I was there on their off day. So when they're fishing just one fishery, they're just fishing Kentucky, then they have the day before the event, they have an off day. And we had Gary Klein and Nick LeBruin join me and the state of Kentucky, and we built a product that Mossback Fish Habitat builds called the reed mat. And the reed mat is like, those old school stake beds where they used to like drive wooden stakes in the ground. They put them
Okay.
in rows. Have you seen this? This is not a northern thing, it's a southern thing.
No.
Okay, Bailey, imagine like 4-foot wooden surveyor stakes driven in the ground like every 12 inches in 4 rows. And they probably go, so they're every 12 inches, like 8 feet long. And then there's another row. And they just go, they drive them straight in the ground. They're great for like large sunfish, crappie will spawn in them, but they break down over time. So Mossback has made what's called the reed mat. And Mossback builds their products out of recycled PVC. So it
Okay.
has 4 tubes that lay on the bottom. They land on the bottom, and then they have their arms come up, and the arms are 60 inches long. So we're able to build like this 4 by 60 inch reed mat, and then we deployed those. So we built 50 of them, deployed them in 2 sites that were out in Kentucky Lake a little bit, like you would access them by boat. And then the other 3 sites we selected were around this ADA accessible like fishing pier. It's more like a fishing jetty. So a
Hmm.
couple of years ago, yeah, well, probably 15 years ago, they built this fishing jetty. So where you can go out on a wheelchair. It's concrete topped. It's got some riprap down the sides, but we put the reed mats casting distance from that all up and down it. So we built 50 of those. It took us 3.5 hours to build them,
Hmm.
and we had the state came and helped us with the deployment. They have 2 habitat barges, so that just allows us to build them, throw them on the barges, push them off. Really efficient product. Kubota came out, the local Kubota dealership brought me a skid steer. They brought me a couple of pieces of equipment just to make it easy to load and unload, move cinder blocks around, stuff like that. So really efficient project. But like I say, I flew in the night before, and then I flew back out that afternoon. I actually flew in and out of Nashville, so I even drove from Kentucky Lake to Nashville. But man, the travel gets you. It does.
Yeah. Well, I will say though, it's cool from the fan perspective. One, it's cool to hear about you guys are the projects you guys are doing. It's cool to see the content come from that. I think that needs to be talked about more is these
Yeah.
projects that you guys are doing, which we're doing right now, and hopefully some folks can pay attention to that. This is happening at multiple events. This isn't just a one and done
Yeah.
project. You
This
guys
is
have
our
several of them.
this is our fourth project of the year. So once again, shout out to Minn Kota. These are my Minn Kota habitat restoration projects. I work with Johnson Outdoors just like you do. Um, this is our fourth one of this year. and we do 4 or 5 a year. They're not the thing about doing a habitat project is we could do one at every event, but the budget on a habitat project, I set my budgets at $10,000 per project. That's just the purchase of mossback. There's also, of course, my travel built into that. That comes out. There's the cinder blocks. There's the volunteers. You look at what is the project actually costing MLF, and it's close to $15,000 every time we do one. And we
Mm.
couldn't do that without Minn Kota. Minn Kota is the one that's spearheading and making this happen. So 4 or 5 projects every year. I mean, I've done projects in Tennessee, Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma, South Carolina, North Carolina, and now Kentucky. It's Alabama, Georgia. Like I would
Yeah.
do a lot of projects all over the country, all over different types. And every project we try to build it around. I want to call it a theme, but that's for lack of a
Yeah.
better term. But we try to build it for a reason. So either like in our event at Chickamauga, uh, the first year we went to Chickamauga, we brought a habitat called a conservation cube. They're 46-inch tall. Um, each post builds like this cube, and then within it is just all these limbs. There's like 70 limbs. So it gets really dense in the center, allows fish to escape. So we actually put those in Grasshopper and Richland Creek in Chickamauga. Both of those are sites that the state of Tennessee uses for their Florida bass stocking program.
Mm.
So when they take the fingerlings, they're putting them there. Well, I wanted a habitat that, once again, it was a mossback habitat made recycled plastic. It's not going to biodegrade. It's going to be there forever.
Yeah.
But I wanted something that was very dense in the center of that to allow fish to escape predation, increase the survival of those stocked fingerlings, as well as those 2 creeks uh, are really important because a lot of tournaments go out of especially Richland. A lot of tournaments go out of Richland Creek. So whenever we have tournaments going out of the same place repetitively, we get what we call localized stockpiling of fish. In last, 2 years ago, we did one at Sam Rayburn Reservoir where I took that kind of theory and built a whole entire habitat project around it. So
Yeah. I
Sam
remember that.
Rayburn, yeah, Sam Rayburn. There's one boat ramp that 300 tournaments go out of every year, and the area of the lake it's at the very southern part of the dam. And there's one creek, and then outside of that, it's deep water. So when the fish are released from this boat ramp, their choice is to live in that creek or follow that shoreline either down the dam or north to find something. So what we did was we actually designed a cluster of habitats that included like some standalones, some of those cubes, some different products, and we put them in this shape that I call the bass recovery zone. And I'm still modifying and working on this bass recovery zone. You're going to see more of that coming out from Mossback, and they're actually going to give some bass recovery zones away to a couple of angling groups to put them in other reservoirs. But my idea was 300 tournaments a year. Let's say, mainly they're largemouth. We've got a few crappie tournaments, mainly they're bass tournaments. They're bringing in their 5 fish limits. They're releasing them right there off the boat ramp. Where are those fish going to go? How are they going to handle recovering from that tournament stress? How are they going to capture forage? So we built these bass recovery zones. We built 3 of them around that boat ramp. So when the bass leave, they have somewhere to go that's going to have a concentration of forage. It's going to have somewhere to go to recover before they make a journey back to their home range if they go back to their home range.
That's awesome, dude. Yeah. I remember you, I think it was this is obviously before we started the real biology here at Serious
Right.
Angler, but I remember it was after the Toledo Bend tournament. And we
Yep.
came on here and you showed that. And also with you showed the map of
Right.
the catches and stuff like that, and talked about that project. And that's pretty cool. I wonder how many locals now are launching there and making, let's make a quick stop. I know there's a habitat right here.
I don't know. I always tell our MLF guys like it's going to happen. Like we've done a lot of mossback projects, but so have state agencies. It's going to happen that somebody someday is going to get on the mossback pattern and it's going to break. Like, well, you know what I did? I just, I ran my side scan, and that PVC, the way they put it in, really shows up. And I just ran and I marked them all, and I
Yeah.
smashed them.
Yeah. They weren't on the
It
natural
happened.
brush piles. You had to be on the moss backs.
Well, that's the cool thing about PVC. PVC, if it's slick, doesn't really grow algae well. So mossback has a process where they scarify everything and it's texturized. And so it will start developing algal growth. We call it periphyton. It's a group of bacteria and algae that grow and create a food source for insects and juvenile fishes. Periphyton. That's your scientific word of the day.
There you go.
Uh, so mossback will start growing this periphyton. So as it matures, it gets better. So you can have, I mean, I've got examples where at Lake Big Soma, we dropped in habitat. And as we're dropping it in, we come back to make our next run to fill the boat up. And Gary Klein's with me, the owner of Mossback's with me, of course, the state's with me of Oklahoma. And there's this guy in like a little bitty boat, him and his buddy, and they just kind of tool over to where we just dropped that habitat. Before we could get back, they were already catching crappie off of it.
Oh,
And
that's cool.
the thing about reservoirs, like that's Big Soma is a very small reservoir, but reservoirs that don't have habitat, they'll live on anything. You drop the PVC in right away and they're going to swim to it. But as it grows the periphyton over time, it mimics natural habitat. The only difference is if we look at like some of the research curves, it will show that brush piles initially will hold more fish than artificial habitat. But over a 3-year time, brush piles will see that initial growth, an ability to hold fish, and then as they start to degrade, the number of fish that are on the brush piles plummets. Where
Mm.
artificial habitat, you start at a mid range and it only gets better over time. And so, whenever we're using the artificial materials, we're building something that will actually last. And it won't be my lifetime, but there are a lot of these projects that we're starting. Like I go back to Chickamauga. We did Richland and Grasshopper Creek the first time MLF was there. And then we went back there this year and we did another habitat project. And instead of having to go back to Richland and Grasshopper, we got to pick a new area of the reservoir to start working on. So we're not having to repetitively recreate these sites because we're checking them off. They're done. Go to the next one.
Yeah. That's
Yep.
cool. I like how you pointed that out about the brush piles, because I remember vividly watching was Lake Eufaula. Buddy Gross had won on the
Right.
Elite Series, and they kept talking about how he went around and was graphing for the fresh brush piles, the ones that still had
Right.
leaves on it, making it kind of like nuclear with oxygen. But they stressed that because like the older brush piles, they might have a fish, but they don't have
Right.
as much oxygen. Whereas like if they have the leaves still on it, that's a bigger deal.
Well,
Like, that was super cool to
yeah.
talk about that, and that's awesome, man.
Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
That's angler theory anyway, right? But
That's angler theory. Yeah. They're not producing oxygen, but I'll let you have it.
well, that was the pattern anyway.
There you
But
go.
that's cool. This is perfect, actually. This is the segue to. I mean, obviously, folks have seen the title. I'm sure you guys see this as a Q&A show with just Steve and I. But we have a bunch of questions that were submitted. We have obviously a bunch of emails that came through already. But I went and put up a story post on the Serious Angler Instagram of, hey, we're gonna do a Q&A show where you guys get to ask Steve your questions, and you guys showed up. We had over like 80 DMs in that little question story from you guys that had a lot of different questions. We're not gonna get to 80 of them, but we are gonna get to a decent amount. But that being said, is with the stockpile of questions, we will get to them eventually. Don't think that
Cool.
we're just tossing them off to the side. We'll be making this a frequent thing here with Steve and I, and then obviously, of course, we'll take hotline at every show. You guys are having your questions answered. So if we don't talk about them on today's show, don't stress. We're gonna get to them, I promise. Otherwise, Steve would be asking 1,000 questions and be here till Tuesday. So.
I'll
Uh,
do it. I will
yeah, I know
totally
you
do it.
That's what Steve's here for, guys. He's dedicated for you. But man, anything else before we start getting into some of these questions?
No, let's do it. Let's do a whole lake hotline episode.
Basically all lake outline. I love it.
Love
All
it.
right. Well, so we're gonna start super vague. We had the first one actually submitted to us. It's from TJ Moreno 47, and he's asking what makes a healthy body of water.
Wow.
Yeah, so very vague.
That is an open. So
Yeah.
okay, deep cuts. What makes healthy body of water? Well, water quality is the number one thing. Thing you probably overlook the most. The thing that, as a manager, it's probably the hardest to control. But let's just say that a fish cannot live in an environment that doesn't have good water quality, right? Like, and what I mean is, it has to have dissolved oxygen. We breathe like 20% dissolved oxygen, and a fish breathes a part per million, so 0.00% oxygen.
Hmm.
So dissolved oxygen is very important. Um, as water temperature increases, then its potential to hold oxygen decreases. That doesn't mean that it necessarily has more or less. There's some variables that change that. But dissolved oxygen uh, in the summer is technically the water's ability to hold more dissolved oxygen is decreasing as that temperature increases. So there's, in theory, less dissolved oxygen form in the summer. In the winter, there's more. You also have things like ammonia, carbon dioxide, your nitrates, your phosphates, like so many things that talk about the productivity of water.
Mm.
And depending on what we're trying to do, if we're trying to grow fish, we want more fertile water. If we're trying to catch fish, then we like kind of a little more clear water. A fish can only see based on the clarity of that water. And, the clearer the water, the faster they can see your bait, which sometimes is a good, sometimes a bad thing. But when we start talking about like what's going to make it healthy, you have to have dissolved oxygen, you have to have a nutrient rich environment, because a nutrient rich environment produces more forage. So the second thing besides water quality is forage. You have to have something for them to eat. Depending on the species of bass we're talking about, that forage could be a number of things, and it should be a number of things. Whenever a lake is supported by a single food chain, we could have an issue. If we have a bad spawn class, if we have a natural disaster, or we just have parasites or something like that come through,
Yeah.
that could really affect a single food chain. But more of a food web where there's multiple connections, that really helps bass. Then we need habitat, and I pull water quality away from habitat. Water is the media that the fish are living in,
Hmm.
but the habitat is what they're interacting with to capture forage or to find refuge or get out of current or whatever it is. Once again, depending on the species, the habitat thing can change greatly. And then the not the last thing, but probably the last thing I'm going to touch on here, um, you have to have some sort of competition or harvest in a system where the fish can't leave. There's going to be continual reproduction. And if you don't have competition for resources and therefore winners and losers in that system, and you don't have harvest that's pulling out some of those fish that aren't really adapted or aren't really thriving in that current environment, then they never get any better. They can do what we call stunting, or they can have some growth regulated issues. Fish, um, they grow through what's called indeterminate growth. So humans grow through determinate growth. As long as you get the nutrition you need, genetically, the day you were born, your blueprint said Bailey's going to be 6'2".
I wish.
Bailey's going to be the rock. I mean, your genetics said as long as you get the nutrition you need, you
You'll grow.
will grow to that size.
Yeah.
A fish is not like that. A fish
Oh.
grows, stops, or starts based solely on what they're eating.
Huh.
And so there's no, like, if I caught a 6 pound fish, I can't say, well, this is a 6 pound fish, and therefore it is 7 years old and was born this year and had a growth rate of this every single year. It's not linear like that.
Wow.
That also means that I could catch a 1 pound fish and look at it, and I might go, ooh, that 1 pound fish is young. But because they grow through indeterminate growth, if that 1 pound fish only ate what it needed to maintain, that fish could be 12 years old
Whoa. That's
because
crazy.
because it's determined on the environmental conditions and specifically the forage it's consuming. So I say, what makes a good fishery? There's so many things. Water quality is the number one important one because without good water quality, you're not going to support fish. You have low dissolved oxygen, they're going to die. Next, you have to have forage because we need some sort of growth. We need some sort of system where uh, fish can thrive. We need habitat because that habitat allows the fish to actually consume forage or escape. In certain parts of their lives, they're going to need to be able to escape predation. And then finally, we need some sort of competition in harvest that drives the system to make fish better.
That's perfect. And the social media clip is going to be awesome for that one because we
Oh
have,
no!
especially in talking about the fact of taking out bass, especially smaller bass, is a good thing to grow bigger bass. There's a select few folks that seemingly say that it's a load of BS, and but their
Listen,
YouTube credentials, is deems them as the know it all. So this will be
cool,
good.
cool, cool,
Yeah.
cool. Well, I know this isn't a question, but now we've got a soapbox, so pull
Oh
that
yeah.
baby out.
Yep.
So here's the deal: if you go back to 1950, 1960, the anglers that were fishing were primarily fishing to feed their families.
Mhm.
So what they caught was food. The
Yep.
recreational side started to develop at that time, but it wasn't mainstream. As popularity of fishing began to increase throughout the U.S., that that correlated with reservoir construction. You guys up north, y'all have had water bodies for millennia. We
Yep.
didn't. We had rivers and streams, some natural, but very few. So in the southern part of the U.S., we had to build reservoirs. Mainly, reservoirs were built for flood or for trade. Sometimes both, but navigating resources up and downstream, um, or for flood prevention and storage. That's why we built reservoirs. A byproduct of that was fishable bodies of water.
Yep.
But once again, 50s, 60s, 70s, that's the height of reservoir construction. That's also as people started to transition to recreational angling. And the the truth is we were managing artificial populations in a lot of our reservoirs. They were under a new reservoir effect. The fish were growing rapidly, um, and the popularity continued to increase. Fishing was never as popular. It's not even as popular today, really, as it was in the 80s. In the 80s, we were 70s and 80s. We were seeing that our use of fisheries needed help because we were consuming too many fish, and a lot of regulations were started to be built in that time. Most fisheries agencies, whenever you start talking about the 60s and 70s, like that's when they were getting their ability to even manage fish populations. It didn't happen before that. There were some that had that, but not all. So whenever we start talking about, well, we need a regulation to even control harvest, that's later on. Then when we start talking about like tournaments and the popularity of catch and release started in the 80s and 90s and became mainstream in the 90s to where everybody was doing it. People between my age and your age grew up always doing catch and release. And how many times have you caught a little fish, a 10, 12, 14-inch fish, and said, I'm going to let this fish go because I want it to grow up and become bigger?
Oh yeah. All time.
Well, you just learned that uh, that fish grows through indeterminate growth, and not always is it going to grow bigger.
Yeah.
And when a fish is stunted, it doesn't have a big head and a small body. When a fish has a big head and a small body, that's because a fish grew to the size that fit that head and has lost weight because recently it's not able to compete in the environment.
Mm.
That means things were better for that fish 5 years ago. Then it
Right.
doesn't mean that the fishery was better 5 years ago. It means that fish specifically was able to compete better in an environment 5 years ago and has lost weight since then.
either to being outcompeted or illness, like variable factors.
Exactly. I mean,
Right.
you have a shift in habitat, forage, water quality, any of those things that make a good system, and that could
Yeah.
change the fish. Um, that fish could have been transported as well. The ugly truth is a lot of fish when they're released, especially from tournament, let's just say tournaments, a fish is released, it stays somewhere between half a mile to 1 mile for up to a year from that release site. Smallmouth are better than largemouth at going back home. Smallmouth might travel 20 miles in a year to go find their home range. Largemouth, they just don't do it as efficiently.
Yeah.
But they'll stay between half a mile and 1 mile from that release site for up to a year. Some of them do return home, but most of them don't. Well, we think that because a fishery has, let's say, abundant shad and good clear water and the right type of vegetation, that if we take a fish and we put it in this fishery, it's going to get better. Or if we move a fish from one side of the fishery to the other, it doesn't matter. That's not true. Um, we know that bass have a home range and then they have a core range inside that home range where they spend the majority of their time. And a lot of these areas are 12 to 20 acres where a bass spends its entire life. And we know that they run almost exactly the same route every day. They swim to the same places. Well, what they're doing is they're being conditioned by their environment. Both the physical markers, the geographic markers, tell them where they are,
Yeah.
and then the forage that's available. Now, you have some fish that their home range incorporates being nomadic and moving with fish, right? They're moving with the shad around. That's part of their home range. They have a bigger home range. You have some fish, especially when habitat is highly abundant around grass, that their home range gets very small. Where it's like, I mean, I've seen research of like small home ranges less than an acre, where the fish just aren't moving.
You see that a
But
lot, like with frogfish or flipping grass. Like you
right,
can miss a fish
you can
and you
go
can
to
come
the same
back.
place.
Like, yeah.
Correct. Okay, so my point is take a fish that has a home range that's 20 acres, that every single day it starts its day by visiting this dock that has a lawn chair that's blown off the dock. And it sits underneath that lawn chair, and there's always bluegill there, and it eats those bluegill. And then it swims out, and there's a hump that it visits that has a rock pile on it, and it hunts crayfish. And then it goes out onto a grass flat and chases 12-inch bass all day long. And that's what it does every day. And you put it in your live well and you take it 600, 800, 1,000 acres away and you release it. That fish is looking for its lawn chair at the end of the dock.
Mm.
And it's the bigger those fish are, the longer they've been doing this, the more they're conditioned by that environment. And that way that it hunts is ingrained in its brain. So by moving them to a different location, I mean, theoretically, that fish spends just as much time trying to find where it came from and how to hunt. And so some fish that we move and we release, they don't get better just because they are in a better part of the reservoir because they don't understand that. So whenever we see these fish with like their big heads and their small bodies, that fish simply could be displaced and it could be looking for its home range.
Mm. That is super interesting. I'm really curious now. So, like, with a nomadic fish, say a spotted bass or smallmouth,
Right,
more or less, because you don't see as many largemouth out chasing bait
right.
as you do the other two. Do they still have like a general home range? Like they'll stick to this one little mile circle throughout the
Yeah,
day,
but
or
it's
will they
it's
just kind of go
much
wherever the
bigger.
bait goes?
Yeah, it's much bigger. They'll be in a bigger area, right? And they learn more geographic markers, and that would be theoretic for me to say, but the research shows that whenever you release a smallmouth's going to travel further and faster than a largemouth
Mm.
back towards a home range.
We actually
So
had a question on this. That's perfect. Keep
I'm
going.
sure we did. I'm sure we
Oh
did.
yeah, oh yeah.
So almost off the soapbox. I think to summarize, Today, we have a different use for our population. Our anglers are different. We're not harvesting fish to eat them when I talk about bass.
Right.
It's very rare. Our regulations were built to allow fish to grow to a reproductive size, not to make fisheries grow trophy size fish. There's very few that are set up like that. I think of Lake Fork, where you have a harvest slot. That is a slot limit designed to make a fishery better, to grow
Mm.
more trophy size fish. It is not designed to grow more fish to a reproductive size. The reason that we want more fish to a reproductive size is because that allows us to make sure that all anglers of all skill and desires are happy when they go fishing. They catch enough fish, right? And it ensures that that population is self-regulating. So our regulations aren't really built to move fisheries to make better trophy fisheries, but our anglers are not participating in that either. So whenever you hear biologists say what we need is some harvest, they don't mean 5 pound fish. They don't mean 7 pound fish. They don't mean 10 pound fish. What they mean are 10 to 14 or 14 to 16, some whatever's legally allowed. That's the size class that actually needs to be harvested. Why do they need to be harvested? Number one, they could be stunted. Stunted would mean that for a protracted amount of time, there hasn't been enough resources to grow fish to the right size. So we're just increasing the number of fish uh, without providing them the resources they need to grow. So it may be stunting. It may be that they're overabundant. Those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. They could be overabundant just because there's too many fish specifically in that size range. We had a really good spawn class. We have a lack of harvest for generations, whatever it might be. We have too many fish. Too many fish will lead to parasites, disease, things like that, that would be detrimental to the population. So there's several different reasons why we need to harvest fish. And then you'll get people that say, well, every fish that we catch is small, but we don't catch a lot of fish. Well, there's a production issue within the system. Some things need to be fixed to grow fish at a faster rate or to accommodate more fish per acre. But that doesn't change the fact that the fish are growing extremely slow and they're high competition for resources that could be small resources.
Mm.
So harvest still helps those systems. Harvest in a system always helps, but you have to harvest the right fish.
That is perfectly stated, and I think it's that note that you hit on was when we talk about keeping fish, they lose in translation to the fact that we're talking about those smaller, potentially stunted fish. We're not saying, "Hey, go catch 30 pounds and keep them all." Like
Right.
we're not saying that, but it's good to hit on.
No,
And
I
while I
mean,
think that's a great show topic, Steve, is we've
yeah.
been on that one for about 20 minutes and we've hit one question this Q&A, so I think it's going to keep them rocking.
We have 79 more to go.
That's right. That's right. So you talked about this difference between smallmouth and largemouth getting, off bed or when they're returned to the water and how much they're
Okay.
they're willing to swim. And so this question here is perfect from Aiden Lindsay 97 says, do fish return to their beds when they have been taken miles away from them?
Um, the answer is no, not really. A a fish will return to its bed when it's. I'm trying to remember the exact research. A fish will return to its bed, but it has to be a short duration that it's kept in a boat. So you take like a fish that was caught by a recreational angler. You
Okay.
catch it, you take a picture, you release it. It's out of the water for 2 minutes.
Going right back.
Uh, it's going pretty much right back, or it's going to return to the immediate area. Then it's going to observe what's happening at its nest, and then it's going to make a decision: do I abandon the nest, or do I push the predators off and take control of the nest again? Then you have the 3 to 5 minute window where that fish may or may not. It may just choose to abandon the nest, and then
Mm.
there's a number. I don't remember exactly what it is. We'll call it 5 to 30 minutes, somewhere in there. I'm so sorry that I don't remember this. But there's a number where the majority will abandon their nest. And then, of course, the ones that are put in the live well that are hauled off, they have no choice. Nest predation also has a time bound association. So whenever you have smallmouth You remove a smallmouth from a nest for 30 seconds, you will see gobies start to move onto the nest if it's a goby system. If it's sunfish system or minnow system, then you may have a minute to 2 minutes before they start to move into the nest. And then their consumption rate depends on what is the nest predator. Um, but you can see if I was a smallmouth, I'm removed from my nest for 3 minutes and I'm put back, and now there's a dozen gobies consuming the eggs, I'm going to abandon the nest. Um, Conversely, I am held out of the water for 3 minutes. I'm put back in, and there's one minnow consuming eggs. I'm going to go flush it or eat it, and then I'm going to be able to protect this nest. It's a give or take decision. Now, here's the cool thing about fish: um, they don't drop all of their eggs in one reproductive effort. I don't care if we're talking largemouth, smallmouth, spotted bass; they just don't. So, a single nest abandonment does not have a population level change. It takes a lot of nest abandonment for a population level change. In fact, most of those, like most bass, will spawn 3 to 4 times. They'll drop approximately 25% of their eggs every reproductive effort.
Yeah.
Take multiple partners. They do that to spread their eggs over a longer spawning season. They do that also so that if something happens, they get the ability to have more genetic influence in the population. It's just ingrained in them. Um, but if for some reason we have nest disruption, a male would then immediately go start to build another nest and court another female. A female is going to have more eggs. She's going to go spawn somewhere else. And once those eggs are hatched, the real scary part is once they're free swimming fry, that's when they're really vulnerable to predation, and they have maybe a male guarding them for several weeks, but he's also eating them. A male fry guarder primarily is going to gain resources by consuming fry. It's going to take a percentage of them to keep going.
Right.
So, yeah, nest predation can be a bad deal. Sorry that I don't remember exactly the research on it, but that gets you in the ballpark.
Yeah.
Put it in a
Yeah.
live well, it's not coming back.
Right. Okay. That's perfect. So then the next one that we have on here is this is from Michael Pulsaway. I totally apologize if I butchered that last name. But
No,
he's
I'm
asking,
sure that's how he says it too.
what is the difference between F1 bass and the Lone Star bass?
Okay, great question. Both um, speak towards a trademark more than a specific type of bass, right? So we have Florida bass, and then we have largemouth bass, two different scientific names: Micropterus nigricans, Micropterus salmoides. Nigricans are for your largemouth bass, and salmoides are for your Florida bass. When you cross one of each, I don't care if it's male or female, you have to have one of each. When you cross them together, you get a first generation cross. Two different species, you're crossing them, you get a first generation cross. A first generation cross is often referred to as an F1. A second cross would be an F2. A third cross would be an F3. So every generation would get a generational number. So it would be an FX, whatever generation of cross it was. When you hear about F1 stockings, they may use the name like tiger bass. Tiger bass is what American Sportfish produces. That's a trade name for that company on what their F1s are. But that's a first generation cross between the Florida and the largemouth bass.
Mm.
The Lone Star bass is a Florida bass. And I call it, also a trade name because what it is, the state of Texas has taken the share lunker program to basically the next level. Historically, the share lunker program was any fish 13 pounds or greater would have the potential to be donated to the state Texas Parks and Wildlife, brought to the Texas Freshwater Fisheries Center, and spawned. Eventually, they decided they would spawn those with a Florida bass male. Then, as the program evolved, they decided to spawn the Sherlunker female to a Florida bass male that was also a Sherlunker offspring. Okay, so it had to be 100% Florida and a Sherlunker offspring. And
Okay.
then now today, what a Lone Star bass is it is a Florida bass whose mom and dad are both Sherlunker offspring. Basically, they just replaced the Florida bass that they were getting from the state of Florida with Florida bass that were raised in their own system and come from Sherlunker parents. The state of Texas would produce, let's say, 4 million pure Florida offspring per year, and somewhere between 300 and 500,000 Sherlunker offspring per year. So by switching to the Lone Star bass, what they're able to do is take that entire number, somewhere around 4.5 million fish a year, and make sure that they all have a genetic link to Sherlunkers. But they are not F1s because they don't have largemouth bass genetic in them. They only have Florida
Mm,
bass genetic in them.
okay. That that was a lot to take in. Well, I think that was a great
Really?
depiction.
I thought that was the simplest question we've had so far.
Oh no, it was simple. I'm just saying like information like overload on the different I guess between the Lone Star and the F1. No, I think it was perfectly
Well,
stated. It's definitely not
good.
confusing. I'm just saying that was a lot. It was good.
It's definitely confusing. But I think what you have to realize is um, if we made like a hierarchical tree, and I
Okay.
said, my goal, or you call me and you're like, Steven, I want to hire you to raise me a 12-pound bass. And I would say, great. Pure Florida bass give you the best chance to get to 12 pounds. But if you could buy a pure Florida bass that also has trophy genetic markers, then that gives you an even better chance
Okay.
of raising a 12-pound bass. And you said, okay, then I want to do that. Then I would call, for this example, Tex Parks Wildlife, Lone Star Bass, and I'd say, can I get the pure Florida bass with the genetic markers? Can't do that in the private sector. Instead, we had to call, we had a conversation with Josh from Red Hills. We would call Red Hills and we would say,
Yeah.
Josh, get us pure Florida bass with genetic markers. And then we would sell you that. And that would give you the best chance. And F1 has largemouth genetic in it. And to oversimplify this, largemouth have less ability to learn lures and are more aggressive towards lures than Florida bass are.
Ah,
So by crossing them, you take, I think I can get the Florida genetic trophy growth, and I think I can get the largemouth bass aggressiveness, and I can put those in one fish. That's very hard to prove, but that's what an F1 stands on, is that it can give you both of those things. It can't guarantee anything, and it doesn't really push you towards that advanced size growth because we don't know how Florida trophy markers um, work in largemouth bass. It's a different genetic of fish, so we don't know. They don't line up and do the same thing.
okay. I think you definitely have people's attention too when you talk about, especially when a fish is more apt to not learn lures and be
Right.
more willing to bite. I think people kind of like, oh, maybe I'll focus on those instead.
Well, it just
That's
depends
perfect.
where your management strategy goes. Yep.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Um, the next one we have is from actually a buddy of ours. He's actually on the fantasy fishing crew. I think it's one worth talking about because we've talked about this briefly, but he's talking about thoughts on buzzard rocks and G juice.
Okay. And you had to school me on buzzer rocks, and I'm sure your audience is more up to date on those things than I am. I
We can
had
even
to,
throw in too like things like fish lung and stuff like that.
yeah,
Some of these additives for yeah are
yeah,
geared towards tournament anglers.
exactly. So, and this is just general opinion. I'm going to give you first the disclaimer opinion.
Okay.
The disclaimer opinion would say the reason you don't have a single state agency or technically Bassmaster or MLF promoting the use of those products is because none of them are FDA regulated. And just like we talked about earlier, people could harvest these fish and eat them, which means they are in our food chain. So they are technically a wildlife or agricultural product. So when they're in your possession, whatever you treat them with has to be approved by the FDA if somebody else has the potential to consume them. So no state agency is going to say you should use G juice, not because G juice is a bad product. You should use Buzzer Rocks, not because Buzzer Rocks is a bad product. They're not going to say that because they're legally not allowed to. The FDA tells us that there's only three things that we can put on fish when we transport them if they're going to be in the food chain. Those things are salt, dissolved oxygen, and water.
Mm,
That's it.
very basic.
It's very basic. Those are what we can use. Um, Salt is good because it creates a slime coat. It allows the fish to excrete the slime that's on the side of its body and protect it from bacterial infections. Dissolved oxygen is good as long as it's in moderation in the correct proportions because that's what the fish are breathing. And then we can use water, and we use water in the form of ice to cool the temperature down, right? You cool the temperature down 5 to 10 degrees max from surface temperature. You don't cool it more than 5 to 10 degrees. Those are what we can do. So whenever we talk about these other things, G juice, Buzzer Rocks, give me the list again. The reason that you don't see those recommended is just because of this FDA technicality. Do they work? That's a different thing. When a fish is bleeding from a gill, there's a dozen things. There's pour soda on it. There's use one of these products. Basically, how the gill works is the water goes in the mouth, past the gill filament, and out the back of the gill plate. So it's a directionality through the mouth and out the gill plate. The blood that flows out of the gill actually flows the opposite direction. So it's flowing into the gill filament towards the mouth and then back around the arch. That's important because that means it's flowing against the flow of water. That's so that as blood flows through the gill, it can excrete waste, urea, ammonia, and it can capture dissolved oxygen out of the water. And some ionization, like the salt, things like that, it can capture those through the water. Whenever the gill is bleeding, the gill is designed with that counter current flow. So if you took a squirt bottle of water and squirted it, it's going to stop the bleeding because that's how the gill is designed. When it has pressure against it, it stops. If you just put the fish back in the water, it would stop bleeding because it would pump water through its mouth and stop the bleeding.
Mm,
Our issue is we want to put it in a live well. And the live well is a small contained area,
right.
20 gallons. So that blood in the live well can cause an issue, and we don't want it to kill fish. So that's why some of those products exist, is so that you can then do something to immediately stop it, and then that fish will theoretically survive long enough for you to go through a weigh-in. Now, what we don't know is what happens on a cellular level of those gills. If you pour soda on, how does the carbonation affect the cells of the gill? And will that fish 3 weeks later still be alive? I've done some experimentation with that just to see what happens. And I wasn't able to kill them, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't always happen that way. It could be time of year, it could be how I'm doing it, whatever. So I think whenever you ask most biologists, they're going to say, unfortunately, we can't recommend to use that. There is probably some application for some of those products, but just like dissolved oxygen is something that we know we need. But if you put too little oxygen in the water, the fish suffocate, they die. You put too much dissolved oxygen in the water, their gill filaments burn off their body to where they can't
Oh,
absorb oxygen, and they die. So it's
sheesh.
yes, like
There is too
tinkering
much
with
thing,
fish.
too much
Yes,
oxygen. Yeah.
yeah. There can be too much oxygen. So tinkering with fish in a live well is, you know, it's kind of one of my pet peeves, and that's why I fit so well at Major League Fishing, because I love the catch, weigh, and release format. Because I don't think, in theory, that any angler honestly wants to compete in a system where you're actually competing, number one, for how good of an angler am I today? How well can I catch my 5 fish? But also, number two, how good am I at being in fish husbandry or an aquarist and holding these fish in this contained area? And we've simplified things because we have good pumps and we have live wells that have plenty of volume, but we still make part of our competition like, how good are you at keeping 5 fish alive? And then, what is your definition of alive?
Yeah,
I
alive
mean,
enough just to have a fin moving when they're on stage is kind of the
right,
requirement. Yeah.
right, and by definition, that fish may not be alive shortly thereafter.
That's the bad part is it's not a competition to keep them alive, it's to keep them alive enough to get on the scales, and then
Right.
afterwards, it's out of sight, out of mind, which is a terrible
Yeah.
mantra.
Well,
Yeah.
and my company has done some things where we work the back end of weigh-ins, and we try to help the local bass tournaments do better fish care. And we find that, I mean, one of the most stressful times of that whole process has nothing to do with the live well. It's the weigh-in bag. It is sitting in the bag in the line, waiting your 10 minutes to come weigh in. We find more fish mortality that happens in that 10 minutes than any other time.
Wow.
It's just, it's part of the nasty part of bass tournaments that we still can't figure out. Um, I think that bass tournaments do a great job of figuring out who is the best competitor that day. But then we caveat that with, you have to keep 5 fish alive, and then how long are those fish alive?
Yeah. And then there comes the question of delayed mortality.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
That's a tough
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, that's for another show. Uh, so getting into a different topic here, back
Okay.
kind of on the water quality. We'll have two more for this show, and we'll wrap things up here. Um, Shane OMW says, "How do agricultural herbicides from agriculture runoff affect water quality in soils samples?"
That's a great and complex question.
Yeah.
So there's only, I'm going to say, 7 to 9 active ingredients for aquatic herbicides. Some of them overlap. So there's an aquatic version of 2,4-D. There's an aquatic version of glyphosate. There's an aquatic version of several of your organic or of your terrestrial and aquatic herbicides. Um, Whenever you use a herbicide has a mode of action, and then it has what we call half life. So first, you spray, and it doesn't matter. I could be talking aquatic or terrestrial right now. You spray onto a plant. The herbicide absorbs into the plant and affects some part of that plant, whether it's root growth or stem growth or ability to undergo photosynthesis. It does something to the plant, right? And that's what causes the mortality or the prevention of growth or whatever it might be, whatever regulation they're going to do. Now, almost all of them degrade with sunlight. So the longer they're in the sun, the less potent they are. And some of them in the aquatic environment, we're talking hours or even minutes, really,
Wow.
of activity in the water column. The others, they're more stable, and we can be talking about 30 to 60 days. So to answer like this broad ranging question, like what do ag herbicides do? Um, it depends on the herbicide. It depends on what is its half life, how quickly does it wash into the water body, and then what mode of action does it have? Because if we think about, I'm going to say glyphosate because we all know it, Roundup. If we think about Roundup, Roundup would immediately impact. Let's say we sprayed it on a golf course, spraying it on a golf course. We get a big rain within the next 2 hours, and it washes off into a reservoir. Any plant that would be affected by that glyphosate would be something that has a root, number one, And it would be something that has a rigid stem. So I'm thinking cattails. I'm thinking possibly American lotus, water lily, something like that. It would have to have a rigid stem and it would have to have roots. And then it would have to absorb enough of it to go down into the root and stop the root from growing. If you're talking about something like coontail, coontail has no root and has a flaccid stem. So it's not going to impact coontail. Hydrilla, same thing. Hydrilla has a root, but it has a flaccid stem. Um, I could take glyphosate and have 10 acres of hydrilla and spray directly on it, and I can't kill it because the mode of action doesn't work for that plant. So it's very dependent on which herbicide and what happens to it, like what its mode of action is. You also have a dilution factor. When you're talking about a lot of these herbicides, what you're going to spray on a field has already been diluted once because they mix them with a carrying agent, most commonly water, but it's going to be diluted once. And then it's diluted a second time when it hits the water body. If I'm using an aquatic approved herbicide, then it is different. Our primary aquatic herbicides aren't used terrestrially because they would have to dilute them in a way that really wouldn't work, and the mode of actions wouldn't work because, once again, a lot of our aquatic plants have these flaccid stems and just a different growth mechanism. So some of them I'm sure would cause a big impact, but very few, just because of you'd have to have the right one for the right plant at the right time.
I love that, and I mean, that's been some of the conversation here up in New York as well, talking about
Right.
what could be some possibilities of why some of our lakes and our grass are disappearing. But that's a whole other conversation for another day. But uh, I think we'll get to two more questions here because I actually have another one here that I think could be a quick hitter and then one I think people would enjoy.
Okay.
That is from Creed Garner Fishing. It says, "Are there always fish up shallow all year round?"
Yes.
There you go. Yes or no? Yeah.
There are always. I mean, when I electrofish, I can find fish shallow. Now,
Mhm.
is it the majority of fish? No, but there are always fish that are up shallow that can be found.
That is perfect. Sorry, I had a random my Pandora on my other tab just started playing. So apologies if anybody actually. Funny that this guy's name is Creed Garner. I don't know if anybody heard Creed, but I had Creed Pandora station playing on another tab. Must have hit play. But either way, getting into that, which is actually, if people want to hear more about fishing shallow all year round, we had a pod with Zach Burge, who's a
Cool.
BPT guy, talking about catching them shallow all year round everywhere he
Yeah.
goes. There's a great little segue to that.
Good.
But one of the last questions, if not the last question we have here for you, Steve, from CJ Hill 17. I think you'll really enjoy this one. And it's a great one to end our first Q&A show on. Is what is a conservation effort that states do that you'd like to see implemented nationally?
Okay. I got it. So let's say there's no national organization. So every state would have to independently do these things.
Mhm.
And the toughest part with reservoir management is that reservoir issues are localized, right? The things that impact you, Bailey, do not impact me here in Texas. They just
Right.
don't.
Right.
Different type of bass, different type of environment, different type of growth and weather and all those things. So your local issues are your local issues. But that doesn't mean that we can't approach them all in the same way. And for me, I'm a huge proponent of getting anglers engaged and involved. One of my favorite projects was at a small reservoir called Paintsville Lake in Kentucky. And that group wanted to stock F1 largemouth bass. And to start that process, they called Of course, they called their local state agency. They've called several biologists. They got a hold of me. They got a hold of Gene Gilliland at Bassmaster. And we all have opinions on the best approach. And what I told them is you need to take your local tournament, and the next time y'all do a weigh in, you need to weigh and get a length on every single bass. Give me 100 of them. And let's just look at how do your bass compare to a standard weight chart. And we call this a relative weight. Uh, in humans, we call this like a BMI, body mass index. Like it's just a fitness. Do you fit with what you should weigh based on your height, or for a fish's case, your length? Do you
Yep.
fit? Um, because what that tells us is what percentage of the population is thriving and what percentage needs help. And we can divide it into inch classes. We can divide those inch classes into year classes. And these are things that your agency are doing, um, but they're doing them maybe in a way that you haven't seen the data. But this is something that you can go to my website. You can download the relative weight chart. You can put your links and weights in, and you can do this yourself with nobody else. Nobody else has to be involved. Y'all's links, y'all's weights on every fish. Do 100 of them. Because then we can start talking about size classes, year classes, or overall fishery. Is it actually better or worse than we thought it was? Because we look at a fish and we think anecdotally, this is a bad fish, but is it? Or this is a great fish. Well, is it? Those are the kinds of first steps that get you involved and engaged. Then you take that data uh, and you start discussing how do we improve the fishery around that. Because those centralized improvements, that might be habitat, that might be vegetation addition, or subtraction. It could be forage abundance, adding forage, changing forage somehow. It could be stocking. It could be genetics. It could be water quality. It could be a concert of all these things. But we have to have some starting point, and that starting point we like to call it relative weight. I think that I think that would be a cool one to see take some national shape, because that would mean that you, as an angler, you're already competing in a tournament. The problem is right now, for most of us, we compete in a 5 fish bag. We weigh that bag as 5 fish, and then we release those fish, and we never know anything about the individuals unless we have a big fish prize, and we may get 2 or 3 of those fish weighed in, and that's it. We still don't get their links. When it's you kayak guys, y'all are getting links, but you're not necessarily correlating that with the weight.
Right.
So we're always missing a piece of the data. Even for MLF, MLF, we do the Bass Pro Tour, Kentucky Lake. I'm thinking it's like 4,000 fish catches for the week. I provide those fish catches as individuals to the state, but I'm only providing them weight. I'm not providing them the links. So a state would then have to look at their own data and then try to assign a link to it based on their historic information that they've already collected. Uh, Whenever we can create ownership of that data, I think that's really cool. And I think we've got some podcasts coming up with a couple of angler groups that are going to tell you their story about what they've done. And I think you're going to see that um, finding that gateway, finding that introduction to do some citizen science is not a bad thing. That's a really good way to approach it. I also think that incorporating and evolving your local biologists, saying, we're going to have this tournament, we're going to be taking links and weights, and we're going to collect them. We'd love for you to be here. And let them be part of the process so that you can start bridging that relationship, because you're going to need somebody to look at that data. I can't look at everybody's across the nation. You can send them to Bailey, and he can send them to me. Uh,
Now you're
but
gonna flood
and,
my DMs with there.
yeah, flood his DMs. Um, but I think that that's a great place to start. Is let's look at the fish themselves.
Love that. Heck yeah. Well, Steve, thank you for taking the time to answer all of these, and guys, keep them coming, because, like we said, we're not always going to be doing Q&A shows every week, but we do have the lake hotline aspect to every single show where your guys' questions can get answered. So make sure you're always either emailing to them, DMing myself or Steve with those
Yep.
questions you guys have. But the last thing I want to ask you one,
Okay.
More on you, Steve, than actual than a fish question, and that is
Okay.
what is the favorite your favorite fishery that you've traveled to over your years, whether it's with Major League Fishing or prior to that, and done some habitat restoration.
Oh, and did habitat there.
I guess
Um,
you could have, or even fished, but I guess I'm more curious on that side.
okay. I love Spirit Lake. Spirit Lake is just a cool adventure lake. It's so fun to be driving through the middle of Iowa, and all of a sudden you show up, and there's like this little mecca around pure fishing in Berkeley specifically. Like that's an experience
Yeah,
in itself. Um, I fished Lake Oahe in South Dakota with Gary Klein whenever he was pre-fishing for 2018 Bassmaster Elites, and that's a fun fishery because the community around it. It's primarily smallmouth. Nothing. I don't think there's anything just dramatically different with their smallmouth compared to other places I've been. But the community around Oahe is so outdoorsman specific. Like it's an experience that I think you definitely have to have. And of course, I am close, like an hour from Lake OHIV here in Texas. And OHIV, like so many people see it as this trophy bass mecca, which it definitely is. But it's also one of the coolest case studies in what do newer reservoirs that fluctuate, what are their potential, and then how quickly can it humble you? Because I've been on OHIV, and you might go back to back cast and catch a 9 pound largemouth, and the next cast catch a 5 pound mean mouth because there's technically some smallmouth in there, but a lot of them are mean mouths. You might do that, and then you may also fish for the next 4 hours and not get a bite.
yeah.
Um, it's this really cool, humbling lake. And then on the private sector side, man, I've got some really cool places we get to go fish, and a lot of that has to do with the people that own it. Just great people. But some of it just is the experiment of it. Can you grow? Like we have this 40-acre lake not far from the house, probably 20 minutes away from the house. And the guy called me. This is a decade ago. The guy calls me and says, "I want to sell the property." And the lake went dry last year and is just refilled. And I want to sell the property as a trophy bass lake. How many years till you can grow them to be 10 pounds? And he's like, money doesn't matter. Just grow them to 10 pounds as fast as you possibly can get them there. And, we caught 6 pound fish at the end of year two. And at the end of year three, they were 9.5, to where, he's catching 10 pound fish year four, easy. And he sells that property for over $1 million just because it's got the 10 pound fish in it. Like those kind of projects, those kind of places, it's hard to travel around the country whenever you know that you can experience some of those things on the private sector side too.
You definitely got to see some fisheries. That's for dang
Yeah.
sure. That's a
Well,
cool
I
part of it.
I love building them. I love
Yeah.
building them. I love it when a guy calls me and says, "I want this. What is it going to take?" And then we get to draw it on a piece of paper and say, "This is really what it's going to take. Do you want to do it or not?"
That's my goal, Steve, is to do well enough for myself in life that I can call you up and say, "Hey, I want to build my own pond."
Yeah.
that's what I
Yeah,
want.
we're still at the phase where you need to call me up and say, "Hey, where can we go fishing?"
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. I love it. I like that you mentioned Spirit Lake too, because quite literally, it is like people talk about. You've seen in movies where you're out in the desert, and then you see
Right.
the mirage, the fake,
Yeah.
like castle and everything, and that's what Spirit Lake feels like. It's a desert of just cornfields, and then you just randomly stumble upon this like not even like
Whole
city, like
community.
two suburbs, and then a giant
Right.
lake chain that's
Yep.
filled with multi species that are all big and healthy and stupid. You're like, this doesn't seem real, but it does
I
exist.
know that's my thing is if I'm going to go somewhere at this point, I want them to be real stupid.
Yeah, I don't want any smart fish.
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, Spirit Lake's one of those. It's a great
Yeah,
time.
I do like the idea that on any cast I could catch a walleye, a smallmouth, a crappie, a largemouth, a pike.
So Yeah, they got some skis in there. They have what's cool, I didn't realize was in existence until the first day I fished it because I caught one. And I was like, what the heck is this thing? But there's silver pike. I'm like,
Uh-huh.
what in the world is that thing? But
Yeah.
I had to get a nice
Yeah.
biology lesson when I got back to the dock that morning because I was like, dude, what is this thing? And then they're like, oh, dude, it's a silver pike. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I don't really care that much, but cool.
It's just those are the experiences, right? Those are the
Yeah.
experiences. I mean, I will never forget the first time taking my wife to fish Table Rock, and she caught a smallmouth, a spot, and a largemouth all in the same day. Like
That's
the
freaking
first time, like those are the things you'll never forget.
yeah, 100%, man. That's awesome. Well, dude, do you a great Q&A, first Q&A show. Anything
Okay.
else left for the folks before we sign off here?
No, send more questions. Also, comment in the chat, whatever it's called, the DMs,
Comment section.
the comment section.
There you go.
Comment in the comment section and disagree if you disagree. Let's have those debates. I think that it frustrates me when scientists aren't willing to have that debate because there's a lot of this topic that is based on your perspective and your
Mhm.
opinion. And yes, mine has some scientific backing, but it's not always 100% right. It is what I've observed or what I've read. And I think the fact is that anglers spend hundreds, if not thousands, of hours on the water. And you know things. Trust your gut too. And let's hear what you've seen and what your opinion is.
Yeah, love that. And that goes back to your point of talking to your local or your state biologist, things like that, because but the smart ones anyway, well, they want to hear your opinion, the things you observe, things you experience, things like
Correct.
that, like yourself, Steve. And so, more you communicate, the better we can work together. Love that notion. I think that's a great way to cap this off. Hope everybody enjoyed today's show. If you're listening on MP3, as always, leave us a rating review if you have not already. And like Steve said, get in that YouTube comment, subscribe if you're not already, and we'll see y'all on the next one.